Oh, okay. Now we have returned we're continuing the lesson that we started yesterday. We started actually 2 days ago. And the Dvar Malchut of the Rebbe. These are discourses that the Rebbe gave in this one was 1992, right? We had Tafshin Nun Beit. It's 1992, very shortly before the Rebbe had a stroke. And a few months before he had a stroke. And then from then on, he didn't speak anymore. And then about 2 years later, the Rebbe passed away. But as we know, maybe you don't know, but the tzaddikim never really die. And so tzaddikim are always here, as they say, even more than when they're alive. And we also, Jewish people, we believe in the raising of the dead in any case. So nobody really is dead, but especially the tzaddikim are not. So here we have these amazing words of deep wisdom, talking almost exclusively about Moshiach. And it's talking about Abraham. So Abraham was the preparation for receiving the Torah. It says he began what's called 2,000 years of Torah. And Abraham also was the preparation of receiving the land of Israel. And in this week's Torah portion that we're learning, God promises Abraham the land of Israel. It says the land of Israel is going to be yours. You're going to get the whole, it's going to be yours. And the Rebbe points out that really God promised Abraham 10 lands, and he only gave him 7. And the other 3 are the Keni and the Kenizi and the Kadmoni. They are going to be given to the Jewish people with Mashiach. So that's one of the reasons we have to read Lech Lecha, this Torah portion of go out from yourself, and every year, because it's every year we're preparing for this, really the arrival of Mashiach and our acquisition of the whole land of Israel, of the 3 nations. And the Rebbe assures us that the other nations will gladly give us the portions that are coming to us, because the whole world will see that we are God's people. And in the end, what we want is really not that big. I mean, it's like the, I don't know, size of Texas or something. It's not really that huge, the area that we want, maybe even smaller than Texas. So this is the whole novelty of Lech Lecha. Why do we have to have the land? What's so important about the Jews that they have a land? I mean, we're God's people. God is everywhere. What do you have to have a certain land for, right? Just to be holy, and that's it, So the idea is, no, that's the whole purpose of Judaism. And the whole purpose of man is to make the whole world holy. So this has to be a starting point. The main starting point was to make something holy was on Mount Sinai, that the mountain at the time when God gave the Torah was holy. And after God gave the Torah, it wasn't holy anymore. But the temple, when the Jews came into the land of Israel, the temple became permanently holy. It became an example of what the whole world is going to be like. But this whole business of getting the land of Israel, this was promised to God, by God to Abraham. And that's the whole idea of Lech Lecha Me'artzecha. So again, let's just to stress this. We're not talking about a religion in any normal sense of the word. I mean, Judaism certainly is a religion. It's called the true religion, Dat Emet. But not in any of the normal senses. All the other religions are talking about, going to heaven or getting some sort of reward. Judaism is talking about just revealing the truth, that how important and precious this physical world is, and to make this physical world eternal, the physical world, an eternal place, and every human being, just to reveal the fact that God personally is creating every human being. No human being is here by accident. So everyone is important, and everyone is different, and everyone is unique, and everyone has an important job. That's the idea. That's the fact. That's the fact. And that's what Abraham is just trying to reveal. And so that's what it means. Lech lecha me'artzecha, go from your land, ela eretz asher areka, to the land that I will show you. She'Avram lo yistapek, that Avram was not satisfied Ba'avoda, so with his service, b'meshech shivim shana is 75 years. That was previous. When did God tell Abraham to leave his land? When he was 75 years old. Abraham could have said to God, hey, I think I've done enough for you. Okay, so let's just leave it at that. Okay, so let me just stay where I am. You want to bless me over here. But I'm old, I'm 75 years old. Come on, leave me alone. No, Abraham heard God. Oh, he was so happy. God, you told me to do something, whatever you want. This is what I'm waiting for, just for orders. Tell me what to do. I feel because Abraham knew the world had to be fixed up, and he knew God wanted it to be fixed up, and he knew that God wanted it to be fixed up through him. Even though this was a tremendously high service, according, even though that Abraham had done very high things previously, but according to the commandment of God, Abraham left his place, and he left his habits and his nature, and he went to travel. Then all of a sudden there was a new thing in Abraham's service of God, of moving, going. Now you have to remember, like we said before, that Abraham previously had been thrown into a fiery furnace because of his belief in the one God. People didn't want to hear this message. And Abraham was thrown into a fiery furnace, into a blazing furnace because of this. I mean, you don't see that every day. And Abraham miraculously came out. And Abraham did not think he was going to come out of this. He didn't get thrown in because he said, God is going to save me. He said, I'm not leaving God. I don't know, do what you want to, but somebody has to make some sort of a sacrifice. You can't have, everybody can't be, how do you say, bribed. No, nobody wants to speak up. Somebody has to make the sacrifice. So Abraham said, okay, I'll be the one, even though I'm the only one. Who's going to know it? I don't know, but there has to be somebody living the truth. So Abraham was thrown into a fiery furnace. That's pretty good service of God. I mean, you don't get that. You're not going to find that anywhere else. And nevertheless, when God told Abraham, okay, now you're just beginning. Leave your land. Abraham said, oh, this is great. Whatever you want, God. Shalicha amiti. This was a true walking, moving. Pirush, what does it mean? Walking, moving, not just physically, but also spiritually, emotionally. Shalo be'erech, incomparable to what it was before. Sheyetzel legamri. He went completely out of himself, what he was before. He became a totally different person, totally dependent on the creator of the universe, ready for any orders. Halicha shalamaylam v'dinav agbala, going which is above any limitation. I'll give you a simple example. Let's take a simple example. It says that a person that really believes in God, he'll never get mad. A person that really believes in God, he'll never get angry. Why? Because he knows that everything that happens to God. Most things that make somebody cuts you off when you're driving or something, everybody gets angry, right? It's a natural thing to get angry. So, but if a person really believed in God, then he'd know that all of nature comes from God all the time. So if everybody really was connected to God, all these negative things like anger and depression and addictions and the vices and lust and all these things, the world can get along really good without these things, right? In fact, that's the only way the world really can get along if these things don't exist. And so that's what it means, go out from yourself and connect yourself to something, to a whole system, which is totally above your little puny, how do you say, egotistical actions and reactions. But that's what Abraham did. Therefore, Abraham went level after level. Abraham learned how to move. He changed himself from level to level. And this is not just the thing that Abraham did. We're talking about the great people of yore and the big heroes. We're talking about me and you. The Rebbe is giving directions for every single human being. To be more friendly, to be more open, to be more perceptive of others, to be more caring, to be less negative, less, how do you say, pessimistic. So Abraham went two different directions, from below to above, namely Eretz Haran, that from the land of Haran, he went to the Eretz Arshareka, he went to the Holy Land, Eretz Yisrael, Areka, that God says, I will show you who you are yourself. The Abraham, therefore, he went from below to above, and also from above to below. That's what we just learned in the Chassidut, that Abraham began to do the work of Chibur Elyoni, to bring the upper worlds, in other words, the revelation of God, into the physical world. Lamshiach Elokus, to draw godliness down into this physical world, to be a good example, to be a leader, a teacher. This physical world, tachton shein tachton lamata mimenu. This world is low, there's nothing lower than it. Ba'ofen nali yoter, in the highest possible ways. Mimasha hayalif nezeh. Mudgash, and like it is stressed also afterwards, after Abraham did this circumcision, that Abraham's name was changed. Like we just learned in the Torah Or, from Av, Av was very, very high, and he came down to be the father of all mankind. Ki avamun goyim l'taticha, I made you the father of all humanity. Livnei came beforehand, he was Avram. He wasn't the father except for the place where he was, Aram Narayim. That's physically. And spiritually, it says he had this level of chachma. But now, after the circumcision, Av l'kol olam, you are going to be the father of all mankind. That it became halicha, that Abraham started to move out of himself, whether from below to above, higher and higher revelations, and also from above to below, to bring these revelations down into the world. Serving God in the world. Shupoil at a birur, that he made a refinement in the world, not only where he was, which is signified by Aram, that was Aram Naharaim, that's where he was, and he purified the whole world. Av Hamon Goyim, he became the father of all mankind. What does it mean, the father? He became, so to speak, the balabayas. He became the homeowner, the boss over them. Even though that he was only one, and the whole rest of the world was who knows how many people. I mean, I imagine it's the same proportion back there then as Jews. It was even bigger. Now the Jews are like 1 out of every 500 people in the world is Jewish. The Jews are like 0.2% of the world. I mean, I would think that it's a bigger percentage than that, but let's say that's what it was. And Abraham, he was one against, who knows, 1 million. How many people lived back then? It was 4,000 years ago. Let's say they lived 100,000 people in the world. I don't know. So he was one against 100,000. But nevertheless, that one had the ability to affect all those one had od yoter mitokev shel Eitan biyoto Avram, even more than when he was called Eitan Avram. This is the language of the Rambam, Maimonides. He writes that the world was dark. Nobody knew there was God until there came Eitan Echad. Eitan means the powerful one, Abraham. And he started thinking, and he realized there must be a creator. Abraham is called Eitan, the powerful one. When was he called Eitan? Before God changed his name. So even before God changed his name, he was already powerful and high and spiritual. But afterwards, God said, Lech lecha, we're not even talking about the circumcision. Lech lecha, eventually he made the circumcision, and then he became the father of all mankind. The Hava Hatalya. And one depends on the other. Because by Abraham was able to go and walk, move spiritually, physically, without any, not physically, spiritually, without any comparison. The pu'ulos of birur, that he was able to reach the highest levels spiritually and refine the world, even the lowest levels. The mata yoter, kol ha'olam, the whole entire world. Therefore, Hevi adavar halicha lamayla mayla yoter. Therefore, it brought Avram's ability to go very, very high. Ereka, God personally himself said, I personally will show you this land. And not only that, I will show you yourself, who you really are. Kamoke, and also the other way around, right? The opposite, Davka b'koach halicha, because Abraham reached so high, Yochel Lavarer, he was able to refine even the lowest of possible levels. Until Shetachtonim, Elyonim, Mitachtim, until the upper levels and the lower levels all became unified. That's to show that God is one. That's how it happened on the giving of the Torah. Parshas Lech Lecha is a preparation for Torah. Like we said, Abraham was the beginning of 2,000 years of Torah. So the whole point of Abraham was to reveal the essence of God in this physical world, not just to fix himself up, not just to give people advice how they too can purify themselves and reach to the highest levels of realization and self-awareness or whatever it's called, to be awakened and all these other things. No. Abraham was there to reveal the fact that God is creating everyone and that every single person can reach the level of Abraham in his own way. In his own way. Yesh Lomar, we can say, Shazeu Abiur, this is the explanation. But what do you mean the level of Abraham? That he can see godliness in everything. See the truth in everything. Bezeu Gam Abiur, this is the explanation when we say Lech Lecha is the third section in the Torah. The Torah begins, the Torah is divided up into portions, right? Every week we read another portion. The first portion is the story of Bereshit, how God created the world, and Adam and the sin of Adam, and how people started to sin. And then Noah comes along, and God destroys the world, and at the end, Abraham is born. That's the second portion. And the third portion is how God told Abraham to go out. And that's the third. So the number 3 is very important in Judaism. Every number is important, but especially the number 3. We say that the Torah was given on the 3rd month, right? There's Nisan and Iyar and Sivan. And the Torah also has three types of Torah. There's Torah and there's the prophets, and then there's the writings. The prophets are like Isaiah and etc. And then there's the writings. That's like the Psalms and what do they call it? Proverbs. 3 divisions of Torah. Number 3. Okay, now what is the number 3? If you think about it, what is number 3? In English, they call it thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. You ever heard this before? There's an opposition, and then there's a third thing that makes peace between them. That's called synthesis, makes peace between them. So the same thing, there's the world, God created the world. Then God created evil. And then God created something between them to make peace between them. That's supposed to be the Jews. There's the world, there's selfishness, and then there's the Jewish people, which is supposed to make peace between the world and selfishness. Or if you want to say there's God and there's the world, and then there's something, number 3, that joins them together. Well, the Torah joins them together, but also Abraham joins them together. Abraham was the preparation for the Torah. Shekein atochen shel lech lecha hu hachana v'hatchala shel matan Torah. This is the beginning. Lech lecha is the beginning of the Torah. The Torah is given in the 3rd month. This Torah is number 3. The Torah joins 2 opposites together. Hakashurim makav shlishi. This is what's called the middle pillar that joins the upper worlds and the lower worlds. So we have Bereshit talks about God and the world, and Noah talks about how people can misuse the world, and Abraham talks about how people can join, right? Noah is talking about how people separate the world from God, and Abraham is talking about how you can join the world to God. That's number 3. Parshat Bereshit, this is the first chapter of the Torah. what it talks about the creation. The main thing is the creation of the world that was created by God. That's the upper world. The main thing about Noah is that's the second chapter of the Torah. This talks about refining the world, the physical world. The first book of the first chapter of the Torah talks about mainly God. The second is talking about the world. Parshas Lech Lecha and Lech Lecha, that's the third portion. It's talking about joining the upper worlds and the lower worlds. That's the whole thing of the giving of the Torah. That's the preparation of the Torah. That's what Abraham was trying to do. This whole idea of joining the upper worlds and the lower worlds, Lech Lecha, as a preparation for the giving of the Torah, this comes mainly in the commandment of the circumcision of Abraham. Like we said many times, that the power that the Jewish people have to do the commandments after the giving of the Torah, shezeh yachdor v'yikva at the kedusha b'dvarim gashmi, that they can put holiness into physical things, behem, that with these physical things they do the commandments. It comes from what Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did. Before the Torah was given, Maisa Avo Siman Labanim. I mean, really, the Torah did not have to begin with all these stories about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You could have just mentioned them in a little hint or something like that. But the main thing of the Jews started that the Jews were in Egypt and that they got out and they got the Torah. That's the main thing, right? That God made this big miracle, took all the Jews out of Egypt. Never been anything like it. And nobody even made up such a story in any of the religions and science fiction. That God took a whole entire nation out of slavery. And then he took him to this big mountain and he gave him the Torah. Oh, that's it. That's where the Torah should start. He says, no, we have to have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to tell us what proper attitude and where we get the inspiration and the courage to do what it says in the Torah. And that says that's from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It says, Maisa Avos Siman Labanim. The deeds of the forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that is a sign and a giving of power to us. And especially by means of the circumcision of Abraham. Why? Because the circumcision of Abraham was the first physical commandment that was given. Before that, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they did the commandments, but spiritually. Shekadushat the mitzvah, that the holiness of the commandments, even before the Torah, before the Torah, the holiness of the commandments remained spiritual. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they just opened the spiritual pipes to the channels for the Torah to be given. But they didn't, anything physically, they didn't last. It didn't last in the world, except for one thing, the circumcision. When God told Abraham to make the circumcision in his flesh, then that put physicality, be'aver shall Avram Avinu, be'aver and b'davar gashmi, in a physical thing. This gave the power that after the giving of the Torah, that holiness could remain in the world. Not like all the other commandments that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did, that it says the Rechosaya, they were just like spiritual, they were just like spirit. And therefore, Abraham said, Sim natachas yorechi. When Abraham sent his servant Eliezer to find a bride for Abraham's son, Yitzchak, so he said I want you to swear, he said to Eliezer, his servant, swear by something holy. Now, nowadays, if a person in a judicial court, Jewish court, if a person takes an oath, and right, if they swear to tell the truth, they have to take in their hand a Sefer Torah or tefillin, something holy. That's why even in the non-Jewish, I don't know if they still do it now, they used to swear on a Bible. There used to be a thing that they do. Maybe now the Bible is forbidden. I don't know what they do now, the crazy things that are going on in the world. But they used to swear on a Bible because you had to swear on something that was holy in the physical world. A physical thing in the world that was holy. In the time of Abraham, there was no such thing. There was only one thing that was a physical thing in the world that was holy, and that was the circumcision that Abraham made on himself. So he told his servant, Eliezer, I want you to swear by something holy. Put your hand under my thigh. That he had, Eliezer, he put his hand on outside on his garment, maybe, I don't know, on the circumcision of Abraham, and he swore by the circumcision. Kadesha the Shavua, in order that this oath should be on a physical thing that was holy. He leave name on Torah because before the giving of the Torah, there was no other commandment that the holiness remained in the world. And because this commandment of circumcision was like the commandments that were after giving the Torah, therefore this was the attachment of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to the deeds that they did, to the physical deeds that we do now after the giving of the Torah. One of the reasons that God chose this commandment, why didn't God tell Abraham to put a mezuzah on his door or to put on tefillin or something? He could have told him a lot of things to do, right? Why did he tell him specifically to make a circumcision in himself? Why? Tell him put on tzitzis, huh? So make a bar mitzvah, right? Make a big party or something. Why did he have to have this commandment? Why did he chose this commandment, that this commandment would give the power, it would be the connecting between the self-sacrifice of the forefathers and the commandments that we do now after the giving of the Torah? Why circumcision? Because mitzvah zu yeshno chidush, because this commandment of circumcision has a novelty over all the other commandments, that by means of doing this commandment, there is revealed godliness in the physical body of a Jew, the sign of God. My sign will be in your flesh as an eternal covenant. And as a Jew puts the sign of God, it's not like tefillin that you can take them off, or tzitzis, you can remove the tzitzis, right? Or make a bar mitzvah, that finishes. The commandment of the circumcision stays with the person his whole life. And this is a sign of permanence. Now, we've said this a lot of times before, but just say it again, the only religion from all the hundreds and who knows, thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of religions that there are in the world that has commandments is Judaism. The only one that has commandments, that God himself commanded each and every Jew to do certain actions, is only in Judaism. All the other religions, they have their rituals, they have their heritage, they have their holidays, and they have their what is it? Their what do we call it? Their performances, whatever the things that they do. They have their churches and their mosques and their altars and the things that they do. But commandments, exact commandments that God himself told everyone to do, is only in Judaism. There's no other religion that has such a thing like that as commandments. And the beginning of all the commandments is the circumcision. What's the idea of the commandment? You're doing something in the world that God is telling you to do right now. This is God's will, what God wants right now, and you are doing it. That's a physical thing in the world, stressing the importance of the world. And Abraham was the one who began this, as we'll talk about more and discuss more tomorrow, God willing. Now let's learn the Hayom Yom. When the first Rebbe of Chabad, Alter Rebbe, called the old Rebbe, he was the first Rebbe of Chabad, he wanted to bless one of his Hasidim called Yekusiel Lepler. That was his name. Yekusiel Lepler. He said, I want to give you a blessing that you're going to be rich. So Yekusiel Lepler said, listen, I don't want to be rich. I know what's going to happen to me. If I get rich, I'm going to be distracted from learning Torah and from prayer. I'm going to think about making another big profit, When the Rebbe wanted to bless him with long life, he said, okay, long life I will, but not normal, pleasant years, but years that I'm going to spend in the old folks' home, thinking about, getting another cup of choco or chocolate, milk or something like that, hot chocolate. Men that have eyes and don't see, ears but don't hear, they don't perceive godliness, nor do they hear godliness. To live just regular, comfortable life without serving the Creator, I don't want a life like that. My grandchildren are around me and I'm so pleased and I'm so happy. Those things are all nice, but that's not the essence of life. I want to serve God. It's better to me to have a life that's short, that I serve God, than to have a long life and successful, but not to be serving God. So he said, I'll take money, but only on the condition that it doesn't disturb me from serving the Creator. And I'll take long life, the same thing. Give me a long life, but I want every moment to be filled with service. Don't make it, oh, look at how old is this man? The oldest man in the world, 250 years old. How did you do it? Every day I did make a little exercise and I do this. Do you do anything else? No, I'm just hoping I don't die. What about serving the Creator? Oh yeah, sure, that's very important. But the main thing is that I'm 200 years old, and that's not the main thing. The main thing is that I'm serving the Creator of the universe. Right? Every second is brand new, and every second is important. 200 empty years is not worth one full minute. That's what he said. Have a good day with Moshiach. Now, 3:00, God willing, we'll learn Chumash with commentaries. Today, we'll learn about the covenant that God, weird, strange covenant that God made with Abraham between these divided animals, cutting animals in half, making a covenant between them, as we'll talk about, God willing, at 3:00. Be with us.